Welcome to the premiere episode of Ask the Educator, a podcast for all professionals involved in medical device reprocessing and sponsored by Healthmark Industries. The education team here at Healthmark has 280 years of combined experience in areas ranging from sterile processing, endoscopy, OR, biomed, to hospital and industry leadership. Our goal is to leverage our collective experience to answer one of your questions each episode, giving you the practical tips you need to succeed in the evolving world of device reprocessing. My name is Kevin Anderson, a clinical educator here at Healthmark, and I will be your host. So let's get started. All right, welcome everybody. This is Kevin Anderson here at Healthmark Industries. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to our very first podcast. I'm very excited to get started and very fortunate to be joined by none other than Stephen Kovach, the CPD guy. Not in the same studio. We're, of course, social distancing as we're supposed to, but thank you, Stephen, for joining me on this show.
Hey, Kevin, it's a pleasure. This is something I know we've all been wanting to do, and ready to get forward and move ahead with it.
All right,
Thanks,
sounds
Kevin.
good. So COVID-19 pandemic has really affected everybody, and here at Healthmark, we're no different. Our education team has been extremely busy lately, and we've been ramping up virtual and remote education offerings. Hopefully you've all noticed that we have webinars every Friday for the customers. We're getting updates coming down the pipeline for Crazy for Clean Games. We also have this podcast that we're starting. So really excited about that. And hopefully you'll be able to enjoy all of these options that we've been working so hard on. And Stephen, you're no stranger to the virtual education and being one of the earlier people who started the CPD Guy website. You know all about it.
Yeah, Kevin, we believe podcasting is one way of sharing information because we believe knowledge is power, but it's a real sharing of that knowledge that makes us all powerful. And I know, Kevin, you've got something you want to start off with our first question, so I'm going to give that to you and give a little history why we picked this question. Okay?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to expound on the podcast thing and the question and answer format that we're doing, we get a lot of questions as a manufacturer and as educators. And so we thought sometimes we see a lot of the same questions over and over and over again, and maybe this podcast would give us a way to get that information out more to the masses a little bit easier, so that maybe we're answering more than one person's question at a time. So hopefully this will help out with that. So getting into this first question, like we mentioned in the beginning, the pandemic has affected not just us, obviously, at Healthmark, but the entire sterile processing industry. And in a lot of facilities now, they're working with departments that maybe they're not traditionally used to working with. They're used to working with the operating room and OB, where they have a case cart system in place for transporting instrumentation, things like that. Well, now they may be working with ER and ICU quite a bit more. So the question is, what should the SPD departments out there be doing to help ensure that they are safely transporting contaminated items from ER and ICU, all these places where people aren't necessarily as familiar with the process? What can the SPD folks out there do to ensure that this gets done correctly every single time?
Yeah, well, Kevin, I'm going to go back to being old again, is that I started out in a traditional sterile processing that we did floor and clinic pickups, and we had what we call our milk run 7, 3, midnight or whatever, and we would go to special care and do different things. But over the course of time, it's sort of separated, and depending on the type of hospital you're in, some still pick up and some don't. Some just focus on instruments. but sterile processing is the area that does the decontamination and cleaning. So the questions we've been getting is, all of a sudden I got to pick up ventilators, or there's these masks now that are dirty and we're going to start reprocessing them. What do we do? Well, there's a lot of things that you need to think about what you're doing right now with your present customers and get a group of the correct people together to form a team, your risk management, infection control, whoever those customers are. It might be special care. It could be anything, the ICU units, and sit down and figure out what it is they have, how they're going to be picked up, what are they going to be put in, how are they going to be labeled. And you probably have some of the things you need right now. You might have some SSTs. Where are they going to go outside the room? Who's going to deliver them? And things of that nature. Kevin, what are some of your thoughts real quick while we talk about this?
Yeah, it comes to mind, obviously my former facility comes to mind. And then one of our processes was we were a little bit more passive. People brought their items to us. Well, I'm thinking that now that they're kind of dealing with maybe potentially people in ER and ICU, maybe they might need to get out there and go and retrieve those items, put them in those SST containers, make sure they're properly labeled with the biohazard symbols, the stickers that don't leave residue, that you can also return with a clean, properly clean label. And then any sort of custom labels that you need, maybe that will help track how many times these things have been cleaned or how many times they've been disinfected. Those types of things I could see really being advantageous for the sterile processing techs and leaders out there.
Yeah, one of the things in this same general question we get, and just something I want to clarify to everybody is, we're just going to try on these podcasts to keep them sort of brief, like 10 to 15 minutes, and try to answer just one question. So with this, some people are saying, how do I do the masks and so on? Well, work with your manufacturer and so on, but you might have to put them in a bag of some sort, put the name of the person on there, might have to have a label. You need to work step-by-step process of doing that. And I want to pick up on something you said, Kevin. Many departments might have been passive where the people from those floors brought it down, or those units. Well, maybe now what has to take place is your staff has to go pick them up. Where do they pick them up? Is it a certain room where, or do they have to walk in front of every ICU unit or whatever? But if you work with your risk management, infection control, maybe that staff picks them up and drops them off in a certain spot so they don't have to de-gown and glove and everything, and your staff. So again, it's using that team approach of how you do some of your things now, using your standards and guidelines, putting it together to have a fluid process as best as possible, and know that this is dynamic. It's going to change a little, and you got to be flexible. You know what I'm talking about there, Kevin? Does that make some sense, do you think?
Yeah, no, I think I think that's a great point that you just made about it being dynamic. I think it's so easy for us to get sort of stuck with our minds to default to the things that we do and that we're comfortable with, and trying to fit whatever our current processes are around the situation. But in times like this is where you're going to need a little more heads at the table, a little more, diverse crowd with your leadership, infection preventionists. I think that's a great point. Bring them all together. You can be the process expert, and they can help you sort of with the logistics and things like that, and getting the word out, getting the support you need, the materials you need, those types of things. And you just need to come together and make sure that you have an open mind in how you're going to solve this problem that, might require a little bit different at every facility.
Mm-hmm.
That, I think, is what's really important, is that, yeah, we're trying to give you some guidance, but your situation may have some unique aspects to it. So
Yeah.
I think it's very important that they work as an interdisciplinary team and come up with their process for this type of reprocessing.
Yeah. You mentioned this. I want to try to tie it here at the end is not every department's the same. And now maybe you didn't have a midnight shift. And maybe because of how these items come in and the amount of inventory, you might have to switch your shift to have somebody cover the midnight shift or more on weekends. Again, this gets back to being dynamic and flexible. Plus, it's also utilizing your staff better. And we've heard people are being furloughed, so now you can use your staff. But now you're also showing your medical facility that the sterile processing professionals are going to step up. How can we help? What can we do? We are the experts. We're going to help you do this so you can save PPE or clean those ventilators or whatever you're going to put in these transportations things, and do it right to protect not only the patients, but all staff. And that's I think, our sort of common sense approach to this question that says, what am I going to do? How do I transport this stuff? And I'm not used to going to ICU, or they're giving me hundreds of these things now. Settle down, take it easy, be calm, and work as a team. And I believe you will see you have the needed supply and the skill set to get it done right. I think we've wrapped up your first question, Kevin. I hope we have,
Yeah, I think so too. And I hope our listeners will agree. And I hope that you guys got something out of this episode. So thank you, Stephen. Thank you, HealthMark, for sponsoring this podcast. And just want to thank you, listeners. If you guys want to contribute any questions to the show, please feel free to reach out to us. Send us an email at asktheeducator@hmark.com. Send us your questions. We'd love to answer them. We'd love to share them. And please feel free to interact with us through that email. We'll try and work hard to close the loop and answer your question sufficiently, because like we said, your question the answer may carry out a little bit differently at your facility. So please feel free to reach out through that email address. Again, asktheeducator@hmark.com. Thank you, everybody.
Hey, thanks again for listening today. You can subscribe to this podcast through all the major channels like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and more.